welcome to Sleepy Story Facts, and to this very special sleep story, one that has been made just for you, for this quiet moment, for this gentle hour when the day has finally grown soft and the world outside has begun to settle into stillness. Tonight, you are not going anywhere difficult or demanding. You are simply going to rest, and as you rest, you are going to be carried slowly and tenderly into one of the most ancient, breathing, living places on Earth, the rainforest. Before we begin, take just a moment to make yourself truly comfortable. If you are lying down, feel the weight of your body sinking a little deeper into the surface beneath you. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your jaw soften. Let your hands rest open and easy at your sides or across your chest. If your eyes are still open, you can let them close now, gently, without any effort, the way a flower closes at the end of a long day. Take one slow breath in through your nose and let it go through your mouth, long and quiet, like a tide pulling back from a warm shore. And again, breathe in and breathe out. There is nothing you need to do right now. There is nowhere you need to be. The only thing asked of you in this moment is simply to listen and to let go. This is your bedtime story. This is your space. The gentle voice you hear is here only to guide you softly toward deep sleep, and it will stay with you all through the night as your body grows heavier and your mind begins to drift. Let the words of this calming narration become like water moving over smooth stones, present, soft, and easy to follow, but never demanding your attention. You do not need to remember anything you hear. You do not need to hold on. Simply allow the story to carry you, the way a slow river carries a leaf without effort, without resistance, without asking anything at all. And so, with your breath now a little slower and your body a little softer, we begin. Imagine, if you will, that you are standing very quietly at the edge of the world's oldest living place. The air around you is warm, not uncomfortably so, but the kind of warm that feels like a gentle hand placed on your back, reassuring, steady, and kind. It is just before dawn, and the sky above the canopy is a deep, bruised blue, not yet light, but no longer fully dark, holding that tender in-between hour that belongs only to the sleeping world. Beneath your bare feet, the ground is soft with centuries of fallen leaves, compressed into a dark, rich soil that feels almost like velvet. The rainforest floor here receives very little of the sun's light. The canopy above, layers and layers of enormous green leaves stretching 60, 70, even 80 feet overhead, catches almost everything before it can reach down here where you stand. And yet this dim, hushed place is not empty or cold. It is alive in a way that is almost impossible to describe. Alive the way music is alive, not with one single note, but with thousands happening all at once, and yet somehow creating a sound that is unified, whole, and deeply, deeply soothing. Scientists who study rainforests, and in particular the Amazon basin, which covers nearly 5.5 million square kilometers and holds approximately 10% of all species on Earth, often describe their first experience inside the forest as one of overwhelming, quiet complexity. There is so much happening, so many processes, so many systems, So many forms of life folded into every square meter of soil and bark and air. And yet, the overall feeling of standing inside it is one of profound peace, as though all of that life, all of that constant activity, is occurring at exactly the right pace. Never rushed, never wasted, each part connected to every other part in a slow and ancient rhythm that has been turning, uninterrupted, for more than 50 million years. That is where you are now, standing at the threshold of something vast and unhurried and quietly extraordinary. The air you are breathing here is among the most oxygen-rich on the planet. The Amazon rainforest alone produces somewhere between 6 and 9% of the world's total oxygen, not because it is a net exporter exactly, for it also breathes in carbon dioxide and exhales both gases in a great cycling exchange, but because the sheer volume of photosynthesis happening every single second, in every single leaf, on every single tree, across millions upon millions of acres, makes the air here feel almost electric with life, though not in a sharp or startling way, rather in the way that clean mountain air feels when you first step into it, clear, full, and deeply, gently good for you. Let that air fill your lungs now as you breathe in once more slowly, all the way down, and release it with a long, quiet exhale. You are here, you are safe. The forest is all around you, and the night is still soft. Rest now and listen, very slowly, almost without you noticing. The darkness above the canopy has begun to change. The deep blue of the pre-dawn sky is softening now at its farthest edges, giving way to the faintest suggestion of pale silver light. Not yet gold, not yet the full warmth of morning, but something quieter and more tentative than that. The first gentle breath of a new day, arriving with no urgency at all, as though even the sun understands that there is no need to rush in a place as ancient and unhurried as this one. You are still standing at the forest's edge, your feet still resting on that deep, soft carpet of accumulated earth, and the air around you is still warm, still full, still carrying that clean and almost weightless quality that made your last breath feel so easy and so good. Nothing has changed around you except the light, and even that change is so gradual, so slow and considerate, that it feels less like an event and more like a very long, very gentle sigh. The trees closest to you are enormous. The word enormous barely does them justice. The great emergent trees of the Amazon rainforest, species like the Brazil nut tree and the kapok, rise above the main canopy layer in a way that is almost architectural in its drama, their trunks stretching upward for 30, 40, sometimes 50 meters before their crowns finally open into the sky above everything else. These giants are called emergent trees precisely because they emerge. They break free of the shared canopy and stand alone in the open air above, their upper branches exposed to full sunlight, to wind and to rain in a way that the trees below them never are. Standing beneath one of these trees and looking upward is like looking up at a cathedral ceiling that someone has replaced entirely with leaves. The light filtering down in long, shifting shafts that move slowly as the canopy sways, casting everything below in a soft, ever-changing pattern of green and gold and gentle shadow. Scientists who study the structure of the Amazon canopy describe it as operating in distinct horizontal layers, each one a different world with its own temperature, its own humidity, its own cast of species, its own particular quality of light. The forest floor where you stand is cool and dim and enormously humid, rich with the smell of earth and decomposition and growth, all happening simultaneously and inseparably. For in a rainforest, death and growth are not opposites, but partners, each one feeding the other in a cycle so efficient that almost nothing is ever truly wasted. A fallen tree becomes a nursery log, its decaying body hosting dozens of new seedlings, mosses, ferns, fungi, beetles, and millipedes, all of them drawing nourishment from what was, just years before, a living giant. Even now, somewhere not far from where you are standing, a tree that fell perhaps a decade ago is slowly, silently becoming soil, giving back everything it spent a century gathering. And as it does, the forest accepts this offering without ceremony, folding it back into the great slow turning of things. Let your breath follow that rhythm now, slow and easy, in and out, part of a cycle, never wasted, always continuing. One of the most extraordinary facts about the rainforest, and one that scientists only began fully appreciating in the latter half of the 20th century, is that this forest does not simply receive rain from the atmosphere above. In a very real and measurable sense, the rainforest makes its own rain. Every single day, the billions of leaves that make up the Amazon canopy release enormous quantities of water vapor into the air through a process called transpiration. As sunlight warms the leaf surface, water drawn up through the tree's roots and vascular system evaporates through tiny pores on the underside of each leaf, called stomata, and rises invisibly into the air above the canopy. The scale of this process is almost impossible to hold in the mind. A single large Amazonian tree can release several hundred liters of water into the atmosphere every single day. Multiply that across the estimated 400 billion individual trees in the Amazon basin, and what you begin to understand is that the forest is exhaling a river into the sky, a vast, invisible river of moisture that rises, cools, condenses into clouds, and then falls back to the forest below as rain. Researchers studying this phenomenon have called these invisible moisture pathways flying rivers, and they are, in terms of the volume of water they carry, comparable to the Amazon River itself, flowing not along the ground, but through the air thousands of feet overhead. As you rest here, breathing slowly and easily in this warm and living air, you can imagine those invisible rivers rising above you now, lifting gently from every leaf, on every tree, in every direction as far as you could ever see, all of it moving upward in a great, silent, continuous giving. The forest offering its own breath to the sky so that the sky can return it again and again in a cycle that has been turning without interruption for millions of years, long before any human being ever stood in this place and simply listened. The light has continued its slow and patient arrival, and now, If you look carefully at the spaces between the great trunks around you, you can see the forest beginning to take on a little more definition. The shapes of roots and fallen logs and low-growing ferns emerging gently from the dimness like details in a painting that has been left to dry overnight and is only now becoming fully visible. The air is still warm, still soft, still carrying that deep green quality that seems less like something you breathe and more like something you are held inside of. The way water holds a fish, not as a barrier, but as a medium, a surrounding presence that supports everything without calling attention to itself. You are not moving. There is no need to move. You are simply here, resting against the base of one of these great trees, your back against bark that is rough and ancient and faintly damp. And beneath you, beneath the soft soil and the fallen leaves, and the tangle of roots that spread outward from this trunk, like slow fingers reaching into the dark, something extraordinary is happening, something that has been happening in forests all over the world for hundreds of millions of years, long before the first flower ever opened, long before the first bird ever sang, in a silence so complete and so continuous that it makes the quiet of this night feel almost busy by comparison. Beneath your feet, woven through every centimeter of soil in this forest, is a network of fungal threads so fine and so numerous that a single teaspoon of healthy rainforest soil can contain several kilometers of them, laid end to end. These threads, called hyphae, belong to mycorrhizal fungi, organisms that exist in a state of deep and ancient partnership with the root systems of the trees above them. The relationship between these fungi and the trees they connect is not parasitic, not one-sided, not a matter of one party taking from another, but rather one of the most elegant examples of mutual cooperation that science has ever documented in the living world. The fungi wrap themselves around and sometimes into the root tips of the trees, vastly extending the tree's ability to absorb water and nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, from the surrounding soil, in exchange for which the tree provides the fungi with sugars produced through photosynthesis. The sweet chemical energy of sunlight converted into food and passed downward through the roots into the dark. But the network does not stop at a single tree and a single fungus. The hyphae extend outward, connecting one tree's roots to another's, and that tree to another, and so on, spreading through the soil in every direction, until the entire forest floor is threaded through with a living web of connection that links tree to tree across enormous distances, a network so vast and so intricate that scientists studying it in the 1990s gave it a name that has since become beloved by everyone who hears it for the first time: the Wood Wide Web. Through this network, trees do not merely coexist. They communicate, or at least they exchange information and resources in ways that produce outcomes strikingly similar to what communication achieves among animals when a tree is under stress, perhaps infected by insects or suffering from drought. Chemical signals can travel outward through the fungal network, and neighboring trees may respond by increasing their own chemical defenses before any attacker has reached them. as though the forest has passed a quiet word of warning from one member to the next. When a young seedling germinating in the deep shade of the forest floor does not yet have enough leaf surface to gather sufficient energy from the little light that reaches it down here, older established trees connected to it through the network have been observed in carefully conducted scientific studies to pass sugars through the fungal threads toward that seedling, effectively feeding it through the soil until it is strong enough to sustain itself. The largest and oldest trees in a forest, sometimes called mother trees by researchers who study this phenomenon, appear to be connected to the greatest number of other trees in the network and to play a disproportionate role in the flow of resources and signals through the system. The way a great river is fed by many smaller streams and in turn feeds many others. As you rest here now, breathing slowly and deeply, you can feel, if you allow yourself to imagine it, the faint and steady pulse of that network beneath you, moving through the soil at its own unhurried pace, carrying nothing loudly, announcing nothing dramatically, simply passing what is needed to where it is needed, quietly, continuously, in the dark. There is something profoundly comforting about the knowledge that beneath every ancient forest on earth, beneath every stand of old trees, this silent generosity is taking place. Roots and fungi and soil, all working together without any awareness of doing something remarkable, simply doing what they have always done, in the slow and patient way that the best things in this world have always been done, high above you, so far above that you would have to tilt your head all the way back and let your gaze travel upward through layer after layer of leaves and branches and shifting green light before you could even begin to see them. The canopy of the rainforest is holding something extraordinary in its arms, not just leaves, not just the broad, flat surfaces of the trees themselves, but entire other gardens, whole communities of plants that have chosen to make their home not in the soil, but in the air, rooted not in earth, but in the bark and branches of the trees that tower over everything else, living their entire lives without ever touching the ground, drawing what they need from the rain and the mist and the slow decay of leaves that collect around their bases, asking nothing of the forest floor below except the simple privilege of height and light. These plants are called epiphytes, from the Greek words meaning upon and plant, and the rainforest canopy is home to more species of them than almost any other environment on Earth. Orchids, mosses, lichens, ferns, and bromeliads all grow this way, anchored to branches and trunks dozens of meters above the ground, their roots wrapped around bark rather than buried in soil, their leaves turned upward to catch every drop of the rain that falls almost every single day in a tropical rainforest, sometimes for only an hour in the afternoon, and sometimes for long, soft hours through the night, a steady percussion on the canopy above that you can hear even down here as a distant and deeply soothing rhythm. Rain on a billion leaves, each drop finding its way downward through the layers of the forest in its own slow time. Among all the epiphytes that live up there in that high green world, the bromeliads are perhaps the most quietly astonishing, and for a reason that takes a moment to fully appreciate. The bromeliad is a plant whose leaves are arranged in a tight, overlapping rosette, curving upward and inward in a way that creates, at the plant's center, a small natural cup, a reservoir that collects and holds rainwater continuously in a large bromeliad. This central cup might hold anywhere from a few milliliters to several liters of water, depending on the species. And because it sits high in the canopy, sheltered from evaporation by the surrounding leaves, and replenished regularly by the daily rains, it maintains itself as a small, permanent, self-contained body of water suspended in the trees, far above the rivers and streams of the forest floor. What lives inside these tiny pools is what makes them truly remarkable. Scientists who have studied bromeliad tanks, as these reservoirs are sometimes called, have found within a single plant's water supply entire miniature ecosystems, communities of organisms that exist nowhere else, that have evolved specifically and exclusively to live in this precise environment. This one small cup of water in the fork of a branch 60 feet above the ground, mosquito larvae drift in the water alongside the eggs and tadpoles of tiny tree frogs, species so small that an adult can sit comfortably on a human fingernail, that have adapted to breed exclusively in these elevated pools, carrying their eggs on their backs up through the canopy and depositing them carefully into the water collected by a single bromeliad. Microorganisms process the organic matter that falls into the water. Tiny worms move through the accumulated debris at the pool's base, and predatory insects patrol the surface, all of them part of a food web so complete and so self-sufficient that it functions as its own independent world, sealed inside a flower, floating in the air. Researchers studying the biodiversity of a single hectare of Amazonian rainforest canopy have found hundreds of distinct bromeliad species, and within them, thousands of invertebrate species, many of them undescribed by science, many of them found nowhere else on Earth, existing in their tiny aerial ponds in a state of quiet, perpetual, deeply ordered life. As you breathe slowly here in the soft warmth of the forest, you can let your imagination travel upward for a moment, rising gently through the layers of the canopy, past the lower branches where the light is still green and dim, past the middle story where spider monkeys sleep curled around branches in the early morning, past the upper canopy where toucans will soon begin to call, all the way up to where the bromeliads sit in their quiet rows along the highest branches, their small cups full of still, dark water, each one holding its own miniature world in perfect, unhurried stillness. And then let yourself drift back down slowly, all the way back to where you began, here at the base of the great tree. You're breathing slow and even, the forest all around you, and the night still soft and full and endlessly, gently deep. There is a sound that every person who has ever spent time inside a tropical rainforest remembers long after they have left. A sound that stays with them the way a piece of music stays, rising unexpectedly in memory during quiet moments, recognizable instantly, deeply, and inexplicably comforting. And that is the sound of rain arriving on the canopy. It does not begin all at once. It begins at the very top, up among the emergent trees, and the highest bromeliad-laden branches as a soft and scattered percussion, individual drops finding individual leaves with a sound like the lightest possible tapping on 1,000 different surfaces simultaneously. And then it builds, not rapidly, not with any drama or urgency, but in that slow and inevitable way that the most trustworthy things in the world tend to build, adding one layer at a time, one drop joining another, until the whole canopy is alive with it, and the sound has become something continuous and full and surrounding, like being held inside a very gentle and very ancient piece of music that has no beginning and no end and no particular desire to be anything other than exactly what it is. Down here on the forest floor where you are resting, the rain does not arrive as it does up above. The canopy intercepts it, breaks it apart, slows it down, redistributes it in 100 different ways before allowing it to continue its downward journey. Some drops land on leaves and slide to the leaf's tip and fall from there to a lower leaf, and from that leaf to another, traveling downward through the forest in a slow relay that can take many minutes from the first impact high in the canopy to the final soft landing on the soil beside you. Other drops collect in the cups of bromeliads, or pool in the hollows of branches, or run down the channels of bark and travel all the way to the base of the trunk in thin, winding rivulets that darken the wood and disappear into the root zone below. By the time the rain reaches the forest floor, it has been filtered and slowed and softened to such a degree that even a heavy tropical downpour feels, down here, like something gentle, a steady, quiet dripping, and the distant layered sound of water on leaves in every direction, more felt than heard, more atmosphere than event. What very few people know, and what scientists only began to understand clearly in the early years of this century, is that the rainforest does not merely receive this rain passively in a process that is still being studied, and that continues to astonish researchers who encounter it for the first time. The forest plays an active role in creating the clouds from which that rain eventually falls, and it does so in a way that begins not in the sky, but in the biology of the forest itself. Among the extraordinary diversity of microorganisms that live in a tropical rainforest, there are certain species of bacteria that have evolved a remarkable ability. They are capable of acting as ice nuclei, meaning that when they are carried upward into the atmosphere on air currents rising from the warm forest floor, water vapor in the cooling air condenses around them and begins to form the droplets that eventually become clouds and then rain. These bacteria, sometimes called bioprecipitation agents by the scientists who study them, are released from the surfaces of leaves and soil and decaying wood, lifted by the same rising air currents that carry the forest's water vapor skyward, and transported high into the atmosphere, where they seed the very clouds that will return as rain to the forest below. The forest, in other words, is not only exhaling moisture into the sky through transpiration, as you learned a little earlier in this gentle nighttime story. It is also sending up the microscopic seeds around which that moisture can gather and grow and eventually fall back home. The rain that arrives on the canopy came from the forest, And when it falls, it carries with it the forest's own biology, completing a loop so perfectly circular and so quietly efficient that it reads less like a meteorological process and more like an act of deep, unhurried self-care. Let that idea rest softly in your mind for a moment as you breathe slowly and easily hear in the warm dark the distant sound of rain on leaves above you, the soil beneath you damp and rich and full of life, the whole great breathing system of the forest cycling around you and above you and beneath you all at once, in every direction, without pause, without effort, without end, as it has for longer than the human mind can comfortably hold, and as it will continue to do, quietly and completely, long into the nights that are still to come. The rain has softened now to the lightest possible presence, a mere suggestion of moisture in the air, rather than a sound you can clearly separate from the general quiet breathing of the forest. And the soil beneath you is cool and faintly fragrant with that particular deep green smell that only exists in places where life and decay and new growth are all happening in the same square inch of earth at the same moment. A smell that is not unpleasant, but rather the opposite, grounding and real, and ancient in a way that very few things in the modern world still manage to be. Your breathing has slowed further without you having to think about it, because the forest has a way of doing that, of drawing the breath into its own rhythm without asking permission, the way a very calm person in a room will gradually calm everyone else simply by being present. And you are part of that rhythm now, your chest rising and falling at the pace of something much older and much more patient than the day you left behind when you first lay down and closed your eyes. At your feet, so close that if you were to look you would see them immediately. A long and wavering line of leafcutter ants is moving through the undergrowth with the quiet purposefulness of a river that has known its course for a very long time. Each ant is carrying above its head a piece of leaf that is, relative to the ant's own body size, roughly equivalent to a human being carrying a large sofa down a busy street. And yet the ant moves without apparent strain or hesitation, following the invisible chemical trail laid down by the ants that went before it, adding its own faint contribution to that trail as it goes, so that the path between the cutting site and the nest is continuously reinforced and refreshed by the passage of thousands of bodies moving in both directions simultaneously. Those heading out traveling on one side, those returning heavy-laden traveling on the other. A two-lane highway of extraordinary efficiency running through the roots and leaf litter of the forest floor. Leafcutter ants are among the most studied insects on Earth, and for good reason, because what they do with those pieces of leaf is one of the most remarkable things that any non-human animal has ever been documented doing. They do not eat the leaves. The leaves are not food. They are raw material deep beneath the forest floor, in chambers that can extend several meters downward, and that together form some of the largest and most architecturally complex structures built by any creature other than human beings. The ants carry those leaf fragments to dedicated underground rooms where they chew them into a fine paste and use that paste as a growing medium for a specific species of fungus that the colony cultivates, tends, harvests, and has been farming in an unbroken lineage for somewhere between 8 and 10 million years. The fungus, which belongs to the genus Leucogaricus, grows nowhere else on Earth in its cultivated form. It exists only in the gardens of leafcutter ant colonies, having co-evolved with its farmers over millions of generations into a relationship so close and so mutually dependent that neither party can survive without the other. The ants feed the fungus their processed leaf material and carefully remove competing molds and bacteria that might threaten the garden. They regulate the humidity and temperature of the fungal chambers with a precision that would be impressive in a human-engineered facility, and the fungus, in return, produces specialized nutrient-rich nodules called gongolidia that serve as the colony's primary food source. A crop cultivated, harvested, and consumed in a cycle that has been turning in the dark beneath forests like this one since long before the first human ancestors stood upright and looked out across the African savanna. A single large leafcutter colony can contain between 1 and 8 million individual ants, and the combined weight of leaf material processed by such a colony in a single year can exceed 800 kilograms, making these insects among the most significant herbivores in the neotropical rainforest. Their influence on the forest's plant communities measurable and profound, despite the fact that each individual participant is smaller than your smallest fingernail. As you rest here in the soft dark, breathing slowly and easily, you can let the image of that quiet, purposeful line of ants become part of the gentle background of this calming narration, moving steadily through the undergrowth beside you, unhurried and certain, carrying their small burdens toward their deep underground gardens, tending something ancient and alive in the dark below, as they have always done, as they will always do long after this night has passed and become part of the slow accumulation of all the other nights that the forest has held in its memory, beyond the place where you are resting, beyond the great root systems and the ant trails and the layered quiet of the forest floor. The land begins very gradually to slope, almost imperceptibly at first, just a gentle tilting of the earth beneath the soil, but enough that the water, which has been falling and collecting and filtering downward through all these layers of leaf and root and fungal thread for hours now, begins to find a direction, begins to gather itself into trickles, and then into streams, and then, over the course of a distance measured not in meters but in miles, into something much larger and much more still than a stream, into one of the thousands of rivers that thread through the Amazon basin like the veins of an enormous sleeping hand, carrying the forest's water slowly and darkly toward the sea. The rivers of the Amazon are not all the same color. This is one of the first things that surprises people who encounter them for the first time, because the word river suggests a single thing, a single appearance, a single quality of water. But the rivers of the Amazon tell different stories depending on where they come from and what they have passed through on their way to where they are now. The great white water rivers, like the Amazon itself, and the Salimos carry enormous loads of pale, silty sediment washed down from the Andes Mountains to the west, giving them a milky brownish color that looks almost like strong tea with milk when the light falls across them in the afternoon. But the black water rivers, the most famous of which is the Rio Negro, the Black River, whose name is nothing more than a simple description of what you see when you look into it, are something altogether different and altogether more mysterious. The darkness of a black water river is not the darkness of pollution or depth or sediment. It is the darkness of chemistry, the result of the enormous quantities of tannins and humic acids that leach into the water as it passes slowly through the forest, dissolving out of fallen leaves and decaying wood and the accumulated organic matter of the forest floor, in exactly the same way that tannins leach from tea leaves into hot water, staining it that deep amber brown that, when the water is deep enough and the light is right, appears almost black, almost like liquid shadow, still and smooth, and carrying within it a faint, warm darkness that is not frightening, but rather profoundly, unexpectedly beautiful. The black water rivers are also among the most acidic natural freshwater environments on Earth, with pH levels comparable in some stretches to black coffee. And this acidity, combined with the low nutrient levels of the water, means that they support far fewer insects than the white water rivers nearby, which in a rainforest context is not a hardship, but a particular kind of luxury, a quietness on the water's surface that gives these rivers an atmosphere of deep and ancient stillness. Moving through that stillness, surfacing occasionally in a slow and unhurried arc that barely disturbs the dark mirror of the water's surface, are the Bodo, the Amazon river dolphins, known to many as the pink river dolphins, creatures so unlike the image most people carry of what a dolphin should look like, that encountering one for the first time feels less like a natural history experience and more like a visitation from something that belongs to a different and more dreamlike version of the world. They are large, larger than most people expect, with bodies that can reach 2.5 meters in length, and their color, which ranges from pale gray in younger animals to a deep and vivid rose pink in the oldest males, seems to have no practical explanation that science has yet been able to satisfactorily provide. The pink intensifying with age and excitement and physical exertion in a way that is entirely unique among cetaceans, and that gives the oldest individuals an appearance so improbable and so quietly magnificent that it is difficult to look at them without feeling that the world is considerably stranger and more generous than you had previously given it credit for. The Bodo navigate the flooded forests of the Amazon basin, where during the wet season the rivers spread out across the forest floor, and the dolphins swim between the tree trunks in the dim underwater light, using one of the most sophisticated echolocation systems of any freshwater dolphin, sending out bursts of sound and reading the returning echoes with a precision that allows them to build a complete three-dimensional picture of their surroundings in absolute darkness, moving through a flooded forest as easily and as quietly as a thought moves through a sleeping mind. Let that image settle over you now like the surface of a dark river settling after a gentle disturbance, smoothing itself back into stillness, reflecting nothing but the deep sky above, carrying its quiet darkness forward in the direction it has always been going, patient and unhurried, and completely at peace. Time moves differently in the rainforest at midday, not because anything has stopped, not because the forest has paused or quietened in the way that a city quietens late at night when the traffic finally thins and the voices fall away, but because everything that is happening here is happening at a pace so deliberate, so perfectly calibrated to the rhythm of heat and moisture, and the long, slow turning of the sun overhead, that the ordinary human sense of urgency, that low, constant hum of things to do and places to be and time running out, simply has no purchase here, no surface to grip, no reason to exist. And so it dissolves, the way a small cloud dissolves when it drifts into warmer air, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, until you look for it and find that it is simply gone, and the sky where it was is clear and open and full of a light that feels, somehow, more generous than it did before. The canopy at midday is doing something extraordinary, something that operates at such a vast scale that it functions as one of the most powerful natural climate regulation systems on the planet. As the sun reaches its highest point and its energy presses down most intensely on the uppermost layer of leaves, those leaves do not simply absorb that heat and pass it downward into the forest below. Instead, the canopy acts as an enormous living shield, intercepting the solar radiation at the top and transforming it through the chemistry of photosynthesis, through the cooling effect of transpiration, and through the reflective properties of millions of waxy leaf surfaces, into something fundamentally gentler by the time it reaches the layers below. The temperature differential between the top of the Amazon canopy on a clear midday and the forest floor directly beneath can be as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, the canopy taking the full force of the tropical sun and dissipating it so effectively that down here, where you are resting, the air remains warm, but never brutal, humid, but never suffocating, the light a soft and perpetually green-filtered presence, rather than the direct and demanding thing it becomes in open ground just beyond the forest's edge, within that warm and sheltered midday stillness, moving so slowly that you might watch for a full minute before being certain that any movement has occurred at all. The three-toed sloth conducts its life with a serenity that makes every other creature in the forest seem, by comparison, in something of a hurry. The sloth spends the overwhelming majority of its existence hanging upside down from branches in the mid-canopy, moving so infrequently and so gradually that algae, actual living green algae of several distinct species, grow in the specialized grooves of its fur, giving older individuals a faint greenish tinge that serves as a form of camouflage so effective that predators passing within a few meters will often fail entirely to register the sloth as an animal rather than a clump of moss or a shadow in the leaves. The sloth's extraordinary stillness is not laziness in any meaningful sense of the word, but rather a masterpiece of evolutionary economics. The leaves that make up the bulk of the sloth's diet are among the least nutritionally dense food sources available in the forest, high in fiber and low in the readily available energy that most animals require to fuel active bodies and fast metabolisms. The sloth's response to this challenge, refined over millions of years, has been not to find better food, but to need less energy, reducing its metabolic rate to roughly half that of a comparable mammal, allowing its extraordinarily slow digestive system up to a month to fully process a single stomach's worth of leaves, and maintaining a body temperature that fluctuates with the ambient air rather than burning constant energy to stay fixed, the way most mammals do. The result is an animal that has essentially solved the problem of survival in one of the world's most competitive environments by opting out of competition almost entirely, by becoming so slow, so still, so energetically economical, and so perfectly camouflaged that the forest simply stops noticing it. And in that invisibility, in that profound and practiced stillness, the sloth lives out its long and peaceful life in the canopy, sleeping as many as 15 to 20 hours in every 24, dreaming, if it dreams at all, in the warm green light of a world that moves around it like water around a stone. Let that image be yours now as you sink a little deeper into your own rest. The sloth above you in the canopy, barely moving, barely needing anything at all, its slow breath matching the slow breath of the forest, and yours growing slower still, deeper and more peaceful with every passing moment of this gentle, unhurried bedtime story. Beneath you, beneath the soft press of your weight against the earth, the soil of the rainforest is doing something that no laboratory, no matter how sophisticated, has ever been able to fully replicate outside of this living context. And that is the act of returning everything, completely and without remainder, back into the cycle of life from which it came. In most ecosystems, nutrients accumulate in the soil over time, building up in layers as organic matter decomposes slowly across seasons and years, creating the deep, rich topsoil that farmers in temperate climates depend upon. And that takes centuries to form naturally, but the rainforest operates according to a different and in many ways more urgent logic, because the conditions here, the constant warmth, the relentless moisture, the teeming populations of bacteria and fungi and invertebrates that inhabit every cubic centimeter of forest soil, mean that decomposition does not take seasons or years, but weeks, sometimes days. The fallen leaf, or the dead insect, or the dropped fruit dissolving back into the system so quickly and so completely that the nutrients it contains are available to the roots of living trees almost before the object has had time to settle fully onto the ground. This is why, paradoxically, the soil of the Amazon rainforest, despite supporting the most biodiverse and productive ecosystem on land, is actually among the least fertile soils on Earth when measured in the conventional way, by the concentration of nutrients sitting within it at any given moment. The nutrients are not stored in the soil, they are stored in the living forest itself, locked up in the wood and leaves and roots and bodies of the organisms that make up the ecosystem, cycling continuously from living thing to living thing through the fungal network and the decomposer community below, with such speed and such efficiency that the soil itself is merely a transit point, a busy junction rather than a warehouse, the place where the transfer happens rather than the place where anything is kept among the creatures that move through this transit zone. None are more immediately arresting to the human eye than the poison dart frogs, a group of small amphibians belonging primarily to the family Dendrobatidae, whose presence on the forest floor is announced not by sound or movement, but by color, a color so vivid and so deliberately, almost aggressively beautiful, that it stops the eye as completely as a sudden light in a dark room. The strawberry poison dart frog glows red-orange against the brown leaf litter. The blue poison dart frog carries on its back a blue of such intensity and such impossible perfection that it looks less like an animal's natural coloration and more like something a painter has applied, the kind of blue that makes you suspect that the world, at its most extravagant, has better taste than any human artist. The golden poison dart frog, one of the most toxic animals on Earth by weight, wears a yellow so pure and so luminous that it seems almost to produce its own light in the dim understory. These colors are not decorative in any incidental sense. They are a language, one of the most effective warning systems that evolution has ever designed, a form of communication so clear and so universally understood among the predators of the forest that it requires no learning and no repetition, conveying its entire message in a single glance. The message is simply this: do not. The toxins that the poison dart frogs carry in their skin are not produced by the frogs themselves, but are derived from the specialized insects and mites that make up their diet in the wild, accumulated and concentrated in the skin over time in a biochemical process that researchers are still working to fully understand, and which means, intriguingly, that poison dart frogs raised in captivity on a diet of commercially raised insects gradually lose their toxicity entirely, becoming, over the course of a few years, as harmless as any other small frog, the poison being not an intrinsic property of the animal, but a gift of sorts from the extraordinary specificity of the forest ecosystem that surrounds it. As you breathe slowly here in the soft warmth of the forest afternoon, you can let the image of one of these small jeweled creatures rest in your mind for a moment, sitting perfectly still on a dark, wet leaf a little way from where you are, its color burning quietly in the dim light, announcing its presence to the whole forest with a confidence so absolute and so unhurried that it has no need to move, no need to hide, no need to do anything at all except exist completely and brilliantly in this one precise moment of this ancient and endlessly generous place, higher up, far above the warm basin where you have been resting, where the land rises slowly from the flat Amazon floor toward the long green ridges of the Andean foothills. The forest changes in a way that feels less like a gradual transition and more like a crossing of some invisible threshold into a different quality of world entirely. The trees here are shorter and more densely packed than the giants of the lowland forest. Their trunks and branches so completely covered in mosses and liverworts and trailing ferns that the wood beneath is entirely invisible. The whole structure of the forest wrapped in a continuous soft green coat that holds moisture the way a sponge holds water, saturated and heavy and glistening with the droplets that form continuously on every surface as the clouds that drift through these ridges every afternoon deposit their moisture directly onto the vegetation without ever becoming rain. This is the cloud forest, one of the rarest and most fragile ecosystems on Earth, existing only in those narrow elevation bands where the temperature and humidity and the frequency of cloud immersion are all precisely right, and covering in total less than 1% of the world's forested land, yet harboring a disproportionate share of the planet's biodiversity, particularly in the groups of organisms most dependent on constant moisture, the mosses and ferns and orchids, and the extraordinary community of amphibians and birds that have evolved to live within this perpetual, gentle wetness. The clouds here do not pass overhead the way they do in the lowlands. They move through the forest, drifting between the trunks and along the ground, so that visibility shifts from moment to moment as a white softness advances and retreats and advances again, never fully obscuring, never fully revealing, keeping everything in that tender intermediate state of being half seen and half imagined that belongs to the most peaceful hours of very early morning when the mind is still half in a dream. The moisture that these clouds deliver directly to the vegetation, a process called horizontal precipitation or cloud stripping, can in some cloud forests contribute as much water to the ecosystem as conventional rainfall, the fine droplets collecting on leaves and moss surfaces and running down to the soil in a continuous slow drip that keeps the ground perpetually damp and the air perpetually cool, and the whole forest permanently suspended in a kind of gentle, breathing twilight. Moving through this twilight, in the middle story of the cloud forest, where the fruiting trees of the genus Lauraceae grow in clusters, the resplendent quetzal carries what may be the most extravagant plumage of any bird in the Western Hemisphere, a body of iridescent emerald and crimson, so saturated and so luminous in the diffuse cloud forest light that early Mesoamerican civilizations considered it divine, associating it with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity, and using its tail feathers, which in breeding males can extend to nearly a meter in length, as symbols of royalty and spiritual power so precious that killing a quetzal was, in some periods and places, punishable by death. The male quetzal's tail feathers, technically elongated upper tail coverts rather than true tail feathers, catch the filtered cloud forest light and transform it into a shimmer that seems to change color as the bird moves, shifting from deep forest green to turquoise to gold, depending on the angle of the light and the density of the mist, so that watching a quetzal fly through the cloud forest is less like observing a bird and more like watching a slow green flame move through soft gray air, trailing its impossible length behind it with a fluid, unhurried grace that seems entirely indifferent to the effect it produces. The quetzal feeds primarily on the small avocado-like fruits of the laurel family trees, swallowing them whole and passing the large seeds through its digestive system undamaged, so that when it drops them elsewhere in the forest, it is acting simultaneously as a frugivore and as one of the cloud forest's most important seed dispersers, planting the trees that will feed the next generation of quetzals in a relationship of mutual dependence as ancient and as quietly beautiful as any in the story. Let that image drift slowly through your mind now, as your breathing continues its easy, unhurried rhythm. The quetzal moving through the mist somewhere far above and far away, its green tail trailing behind it like a slow dream dissolving at the edges. The cloud forest breathing around it, cool and soft and endlessly patient, holding everything it contains in the same gentle, unhurried stillness that is gradually, peacefully becoming your own. The light is changing again now, and this time the change is not the gentle brightening of dawn or the steady deepening warmth of midday, but something slower and more final feeling, the long amber softening of late afternoon, giving way to the first cool blue notes of evening, the shadows between the trunks growing longer and less distinct, the patches of sky visible through gaps in the canopy shifting from pale gold to a deep and luminous violet that holds the last of the day's warmth, even as the air below begins to release it, cooling by slow degrees as the sun drops behind the canopy's western edge, and the forest begins the long, quiet transition into the other half of its life, the half that most human visitors never see, the half that in many ways contains more activity, more exchange, more of the forest's essential business than the daylit hours that precede it, the diurnal world of the rainforest, the world of toucans and howler monkeys, and the bright, industrious movement of the day shift is only one face of a place that never truly sleeps. And as the light fades and the day creatures settle into their roosting places and their resting branches, an entirely different community of organisms stirs into wakefulness, emerging from hollow trees and dense foliage, and the undersides of broad leaves to take up their roles in the forest's continuous unfolding. Among the first and most important of the night's inhabitants to emerge are the bats, and the rainforest bats of the Amazon basin are a group so diverse and so ecologically central that to remove them from the ecosystem would be to unravel threads that run through almost every part of the forest's functioning. There are more than 150 species of bat in the Amazon basin alone, occupying every ecological role from insect hunter to fruit eater to nectar drinker to fish catcher, and their combined contribution to the forest's health through pollination and seed dispersal and the control of insect populations is so significant that researchers studying tropical forest ecology describe them not as peripheral inhabitants, but as keystone species, organisms whose presence holds the whole system in a particular shape, the way a keystone holds an arch. The nectar-feeding bats, hovering before flowers in the darkness with a precision that their echolocation makes effortless, are among the forest's most important pollinators, and the flowers they visit have, over millions of years of coevolution, shaped themselves around the bat's particular needs and abilities in ways that are as elegant and as specific as anything in the natural world. Night-blooming flowers in the tropical rainforest tend to open only after dark, saving the energetic expense of full bloom for the hours when their specific pollinators are active. And they have evolved a suite of characteristics precisely calibrated to attract bats rather than bees or birds or butterflies. They are typically pale in color, white or cream, or the lightest possible yellow. Colors that reflect whatever faint light is available in the nighttime forest and make the flower visible to a bat approaching in near darkness. They produce their strongest fragrance after sunset, releasing scent compounds into the cooling night air that carry further and more reliably than they would in the heat of day. And the fragrance itself is often musky or fermented in quality, a smell that human noses might find somewhat unusual, but that bats, with their different sensory priorities, find precisely and irresistibly appealing. They offer large quantities of nectar, positioned deep within tubular or bell-shaped structures that accommodate the bat's long tongue and brush-tipped muzzle. And they are robust enough to withstand the bat's grip as it hovers and feeds, the pollen collecting on the bat's fur and face to be carried to the next flower, the next tree, the next part of the forest, where the same exchange will take place again in the warm dark. One of the most extraordinary of these relationships involves the giant cactus and the long-nosed bat of Central and South America, a pairing so exclusive that the bat is the sole pollinator of the cactus, and the cactus is a primary food source for the bat, each party depending on the other so completely that the disappearance of one would mean the eventual disappearance of the other, a reminder that the web of dependencies in this forest is not a loose and flexible thing, but something precise and finely calibrated, held together by relationships that have been tested and refined across timescales that dwarf the entire history of human civilization. As the night deepens around you and your own breathing slows further into that easy, open rhythm of deep rest, you can imagine the forest coming alive in the darkness above and around you, the soft wing beats of bats moving between pale flowers, the night air carrying its complex cargo of scents, and somewhere in the canopy above, the silent and continuous exchange of pollen and nectar and life, unhurried and purposeful and deeply, completely at peace. The night is fully here now, and what felt like darkness from a distance has revealed itself as your eyes have slowly adjusted and your breathing has grown slower and your body has settled more completely into the soft earth beneath you to be something considerably richer and more various than simple absence of light. The rainforest at night is not dark in the way that a closed room is dark, uniformly and completely, offering nothing to the eye that seeks something to rest upon. It is dark in the way that a very deep, very still body of water is dark, full of a quality that is less the absence of something and more the presence of something else, a depth and a density and a layered complexity that the daylit hours, with all their noise and color and movement, can sometimes obscure rather than reveal. And within that darkness, if you are patient, if you allow your attention to soften and your expectations to quiet themselves and your eyes to simply receive rather than search, you will begin to notice light, not the light of the moon, though the moon is somewhere above the canopy. It's silver traveling down through layers of leaves in occasional thin shafts that move slowly across the forest floor as the canopy sways in the lightest of night breezes, not the light of fireflies, though there are fireflies here too. Their cold green pulses drifting between the understory plants in rhythms that are species-specific and precise. Each pattern a signal in a conversation that has been going on in tropical forests for more than 100 million years, but a third kind of light, slower and steadier, and in some ways more quietly astonishing than either of these, the light of bioluminescent fungi growing on the surface of fallen logs and decaying wood scattered across the forest floor, emitting a faint and continuous glow that is not quite green and not quite blue, but something between the two, a color that exists in almost no other context in the natural world, so specific to this organism and this chemistry that it seems to belong to its own private category of experience. There are more than 80 known species of bioluminescent fungi worldwide, and a disproportionate number of them are found in tropical and subtropical forests, particularly in the Americas and in the forests of Southeast Asia, where the warm, constant humidity provides the conditions under which their particular biochemistry operates most effectively. The glow they produce is the result of a chemical reaction involving a compound called luciferin, which when oxidized in the presence of an enzyme called luciferase releases energy, not as heat, which would be wasteful and potentially damaging, but directly as light, a cold light, a living light, produced with an efficiency that human engineers have spent decades attempting to replicate in the design of artificial lighting systems, and have not yet fully matched. Why these fungi glow is a question that science has not resolved with complete certainty, though the most widely supported hypothesis suggests that the light may attract insects and other small invertebrates that, in moving across the glowing surface of the fungus, pick up its spores and carry them away into the forest, dispersing them to new locations where new growth can begin. The fungus, using light as a form of passive, continuous advertisement in the darkness, a beacon that costs relatively little to maintain, and that operates without any effort or attention on the part of the organism producing it, simply burning its quiet chemical fire through the long hours of the night while the forest breathes around it, and the soil beneath it continues its endless, patient work alongside the glowing fungi. The nocturnal insects of the rainforest are navigating the darkness with sensory systems of extraordinary refinement and precision. Many moth species, which are among the most abundant and ecologically significant nocturnal insects in tropical forests, navigate using the polarization patterns of moonlight reflected from the surfaces of leaves and water, detecting qualities of light that are entirely invisible to the human eye, and using them to maintain orientation and direction across the complex three-dimensional environment of the nighttime forest. Some species can detect the faint infrared radiation emitted by warm-blooded animals. Others can sense the electric fields generated by other living organisms, and others still communicate across distances of several kilometers using pheromone signals so specific that a single molecule of the right compound arriving at the right receptor on the right antenna is sufficient to trigger a complete behavioral response. The chemistry of attraction operating at a scale so fine that it makes the grandest human gestures of connection seem almost comically imprecise by comparison. Let all of this settle over you now like the forest's own darkness settles, gradually and completely, and without demand. The glowing fungi burning their quiet light somewhere nearby, the moths tracing their invisible paths through the night air above you, and your own breathing growing slower and more peaceful with every moment of this deep and gentle sleep story. The night has reached its deepest point now, that still and liquid hour somewhere between midnight and the first suggestion of pre-dawn, when the darkness feels most complete and most settled, when the last of the evening's transitional sounds have long since quietened, and the forest has arrived fully at the version of itself that belongs only to these hours, a version that is no less alive, no less intricate, no less ceaselessly and quietly extraordinary than any other, but that carries a particular quality of internality, of turning inward, of a world conducting its most essential business in the absence of any audience, without performance or display, simply because this is what it does, because this is what it has always done, because the night is not an interruption of the forest's life, but fully half of it, as necessary and as richly inhabited as the day it follows, and proceeds in the endless slow rotation that has been turning here since long before the first human eye ever opened in the darkness, and wondered at what it saw somewhere above you in the mid-canopy, where the branches are dense enough to provide shelter from the open sky, but not so high that the forest floor's deep quiet cannot be felt even up there. A pair of eyes is open that are unlike almost any other eyes in the mammalian world. They belong to the night monkey, known to science as Aeotis, the only truly nocturnal monkey in the Americas, and one of the most specialized nocturnal primates on Earth, an animal that has given over so much of its skull and its neural architecture to the project of seeing in darkness that its eyes are, relative to its head size, among the largest of any mammal, enormous amber-brown lenses that gather every available photon of the faint light that filters down through the canopy on a moonlit night and amplify it into a usable image with an efficiency that no human optical engineer has yet been able to surpass in a device of comparable size and weight. The night monkey's eyes are so large, in fact, that they cannot move within their sockets the way human eyes can, fixed in place by their sheer size, which means that to look in a different direction, the night monkey must move its entire head, a characteristic it shares with owls, and that gives both animals that same quality of intent, focused watchfulness, the head turning slowly and completely toward whatever has caught the attention, the gaze arriving not casually, but fully with the whole face behind it. What those great eyes are looking for in the canopy tonight is fruit and insects, and the small movements that indicate the presence of one or the other in the darkness of the branches. And the night monkey navigates this search with a combination of its extraordinary vision and a remarkably sophisticated system of vocal communication, producing a range of calls, including low resonant hoots that travel well through the dense night air of the forest, and that serve to maintain contact between mated pairs and family groups, moving through the canopy in the darkness, a sound so deep and so soft that hearing it from the forest floor is less like hearing a call and more like feeling a very faint vibration in the air, something perceived as much through the chest as through the ears. The adaptations that allow mammals to function in complete or near complete darkness extend beyond the eye itself into the broader architecture of the brain. And the night monkey's neural organization reflects its nocturnal lifestyle in ways that go all the way down to the cellular level. The proportion of its brain dedicated to processing visual information is reconfigured compared to diurnal primates, with an emphasis on motion detection and light sensitivity over color discrimination. The night monkey perceiving the world in what amounts to a highly detailed monochrome, sacrificing the chromatic richness of daytime vision in exchange for the ability to function in conditions that would leave a color-adapted eye effectively blind. This same fundamental trade-off between color and sensitivity, between the richness of the day and the depth of the night, runs through the visual systems of all nocturnal mammals, a reminder that every adaptation is simultaneously a gaining and a relinquishing, every specialization a choice made by the slow, patient logic of evolution in response to the particular demands of a particular way of living in a particular world. As you rest here now, breathing slowly and completely at peace, you can feel the forest's midnight settle around you like the softest and most generous of coverings. The night monkey's deep, soft call moving through the canopy above you once, and then again, and then fading into the general quiet of the deep, dark forest, and your own awareness growing softer still, drifting in that easy, unresisting way that belongs to the last gentle moments before sleep becomes complete in the deep quiet of the forest's midnight hours, while the night monkey moves through the canopy above, and the bioluminescent fungi continue their slow and patient burning on the fallen logs nearby. The forest itself is breathing in a way that is subtly but meaningfully different from its daytime respiration. And if you were to place the most sensitive of instruments anywhere along the forest floor or against the bark of one of the great trees surrounding you, you would be able to measure that difference in the chemistry of the air, in the slight shift of gases that marks the boundary between the forest's two respiratory modes, the one it adopts in light and the one it returns to in darkness, as reliably and as completely as a sleeping person's breathing changes when they finally cross the threshold from wakefulness into genuine, deep, restorative rest. During the day, the forest's dominant respiratory process is photosynthesis, the conversion of carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and sugar using the energy of sunlight, a process so vast and so continuous across the Amazon, basins, billions of leaves that it measurably alters the concentration of gases in the atmosphere above the forest, drawing down carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen in quantities that influence the chemistry of the entire planet. But photosynthesis requires light. And when the light fades, the leaves close their stomata, and the great green engine of daytime gas exchange slows and quietens. And in its place, the forest shifts to a different rhythm, the rhythm of cellular respiration, the slow background combustion that every living cell in every living organism in this forest is performing continuously regardless of the hour, consuming small quantities of oxygen and releasing small quantities of carbon dioxide as the chemical energy stored in sugars is converted into the work of staying alive. The result is that the forest at night breathes out more carbon dioxide than it breathes in, a fact that sounds alarming in isolation. But that is simply the other half of a perfectly balanced daily cycle, the forest's nighttime exhalation, corresponding exactly to its daytime inhalation, the two processes together forming a complete respiratory rhythm as natural and as necessary as the rhythm of your own chest rising and falling in the darkness as the air cools through the night hours. The moisture that the forest released during the day as transpiration begins to condense on the surfaces of leaves and bark and soil particles, forming the fine clear droplets of dew that will cover every surface by the time the first light arrives. And that represent one of the forest's quieter and less celebrated mechanisms of water retention. Every drop of dew a small act of recovery, the forest reclaiming a portion of what it gave to the sky during the long, warm hours of the day, among the trees, contributing to that great daily cycle of giving and reclaiming. The fig trees of the genus Ficus occupy a position of such ecological importance that many tropical forest ecologists describe them as the single most important group of plants in the rainforest ecosystem, not because of their size or their abundance, though they are both large and abundant, but because of the extraordinary breadth and depth of their relationships with other organisms, relationships that have been accumulating and refining themselves across tens of millions of years of coevolution into a network of dependencies so intricate and so far-reaching that a single large fig tree in fruit can support hundreds of species simultaneously, from the tiniest insects to the largest mammals, providing food in the form of its fruit during every month of the year through a system of staggered fruiting cycles that ensures that somewhere in the forest, at any given time, a fig tree is in fruit and available to the community that depends upon it. At the heart of the fig tree's ecological significance lies one of the most precise and most ancient pollination relationships in the natural world, the partnership between each fig species and its specific fig wasp, a relationship so exclusive and so mutually obligate that each of the roughly 800 species of fig tree in the world has its own dedicated species of fig wasp, and neither party can reproduce without the other, the wasp entering the fig's enclosed flower structure through a passage so narrow that it loses its wings and antennae in the process, pollinating the flowers within, laying its eggs, and dying inside the fig, its entire adult life measured in hours. Its sole purpose, the continuation of a contract that was already ancient when the first forests appeared on earth. As you breathe slowly here in the cool and fragrant midnight air, you can let the thought of that ancient contract move gently through your awareness and dissolve. The way all thoughts dissolve when the body is truly resting, leaving behind nothing but the soft fact of the forest around you, breathing its quiet nighttime breath, every tree and every wasp and every droplet of forming do part of the same slow and endless and profoundly peaceful exchange. Something is shifting again now, so slowly and so gently that you might not notice it at first. The way you do not notice the moment when a very deep sleep begins to lighten slightly toward morning, when the body is still completely at rest, but something in the quality of that rest has changed, become fractionally less dense, fractionally more receptive, as though the sleeping mind is beginning, without any urgency or intention, to orient itself toward the coming light the way a plant orients itself toward the sun, not through any conscious decision, but through the simple biological fact of being a living thing in a world that turns. The darkness above the canopy is still complete to the eye and will remain so for another hour at least. But the forest has already begun to register what the sky has not yet made visible, the incremental return of warmth in the upper air, the first infinitesimal brightening of the atmosphere at the horizon's edge. And it responds to these signals with the same unhurried precision with which it responds to everything, beginning the long, slow process of waking not all at once, but in careful sequence, one voice at a time, one species at a time, each one adding its particular thread to what will eventually become the extraordinary woven complexity of the full tropical dawn chorus. The first voices belong to the insects, as they almost always do. The nighttime stridulation of crickets and katydids beginning its gradual modulation in pitch and rhythm as the temperature of the air shifts by fractions of a degree, each species tuned to a slightly different thermal threshold, so that their sequential awakening forms a kind of biological thermometer, an audible record of the air's slow warming that a skilled naturalist can read as accurately as any instrument. Then, before the sky has shown any color at all, the first bird calls begin, single notes at first, tentative and widely spaced, feeling their way into the darkness, the way the first drops of rain feel their way onto dry ground, and then more still, each new voice finding its place in the growing acoustic landscape with a specificity that is not accidental, but the product of millions of years of acoustic evolution in an environment where sound is the primary medium of territorial declaration, mate attraction, and community coordination, and then cutting through every other sound with a volume and a resonance that is genuinely startling the first time you hear it, and that remains, even after many hearings, one of the most viscerally impressive sounds produced by any land animal on Earth. The howler monkey announces itself to the pre-dawn forest. The howler monkey's call is produced by an enlarged hyoid bone in the throat that functions as a resonating chamber, amplifying the animal's vocalization to a volume that has been measured at 90 decibels at close range. And that can carry, under the right atmospheric conditions, for distances of up to 5 kilometers through dense forest, a range so extraordinary that it effectively allows a single animal to communicate its presence and its territorial claim to every other howler monkey across an enormous area of forest simultaneously, without moving, without expending any energy beyond the call itself, simply by opening its throat and allowing that great resonant sound to travel outward through the trees in every direction at once. Troops of howler monkeys typically begin their morning chorus before first light, the males of neighboring groups calling back and forth across the forest in exchanges that establish and confirm territorial boundaries, and that serve to space the troops evenly across the available habitat, reducing the need for direct confrontation by ensuring that every group knows precisely where every other group is at the start of each day. The sound of multiple howler troops calling in the pre-dawn darkness, their deep roaring rolling through the forest from different directions and at different distances, is one of those experiences that people who have heard it invariably describe not as frightening, despite its volume and its power, but as profoundly moving, as though the sound carries within it something older than language, something that bypasses the thinking mind entirely and speaks directly to whatever part of us still remembers that we too are animals in a world of animals, held in the same forest, breathing the same air, waking to the same slow return of light. Let that sound move through you now and dissolve, as the forest's first light will soon dissolve the last of the night's darkness, gently and completely, and without leaving anything behind except a feeling of having been, for this one quiet hour, part of something ancient and alive and endlessly, peacefully continuous. The light is returning now, and it is doing so in the way that only a tropical dawn can, not gradually in the temperate sense of a slow gray brightening that spreads evenly across the sky, but in a series of distinct and almost theatrical transitions. The horizon line above the eastern canopy, moving through a sequence of colors so saturated and so swiftly changing that the whole eastern sky seems for a few minutes to be conducting some private and deeply felt ceremony of its own, moving from the deep violet of the last of the true night through a band of deep rose, and then a warm amber that catches the uppermost leaves of the emergent trees and turns them briefly to a color that is almost copper, almost gold, almost the color of something that has no name in any language, because it only exists for these few minutes of each day, and then is gone, replaced by the full and generous warmth of a tropical morning that arrives not tentatively, but completely, flooding the canopy and the river, and the mist that lies along the water's surface with a light so clean and so unhurried that everything it touches seems, for a moment, to have been newly made. The river is covered in mist this morning, a low and even blanket of white that sits on the water's surface and extends perhaps a meter or two above it, formed during the night as the water, which retains the warmth of the previous day longer than the air above it, gave off heat into the cooling atmosphere, and caused the moisture in that narrow band of air immediately above the water to condense into the fine suspended droplets that now drift and shift in the first gentle currents of the morning breeze, parting occasionally to reveal a dark stretch of still water beneath, and then closing again, the river keeping its surface private for a little longer before the strengthening sun burns the mist away, and the full breadth of the water becomes visible in the morning light, moving on the surface of that still, mist-covered water, rising toward the light with the same slow and inevitable patience with which everything in this forest moves toward what it needs. The giant Amazonian water lily, Victoria amazonica, extends its extraordinary leaves across the river's surface in a display that manages somehow to be both entirely natural and almost impossibly improbable. Each leaf a perfect circle of deep green, measuring up to 3 meters in diameter, their edges turned upward in a rim that can reach 15 to 20 centimeters in height. The underside of each leaf a deep burgundy red, and supported by a lattice of air-filled ribs, so structurally sophisticated that the engineer Joseph Paxton used its architecture as the direct inspiration for the design of the Crystal Palace in London in 1851, recognizing in the water lilies engineering a solution to the problem of supporting large spans with minimal material that no human designer had yet achieved independently. Each of these enormous leaves can support the weight of a small child distributed evenly across its surface. The network of ribs beneath spreading the load so efficiently that what looks from above like a simple flat surface is from below a masterwork of natural structural engineering, refined across millions of years of evolution in the quiet, slow laboratories of the Amazon's river systems. The water lily's flowers, which open only at night and close again by mid-morning, are among the most fragrant in the Amazon basin, opening white on their first night of blooming and releasing a scent so powerful and so specifically formulated that it attracts scarab beetles from considerable distances, drawing them down into the flower's warm interior, where the temperature is measurably higher than the surrounding air. The flower generating its own heat through a process called thermogenesis, creating a warm, fragrant chamber in which the beetles spend the night, collecting pollen on their bodies before the flower closes in the morning, trapping them briefly and gently, then reopening the following night as a deep pink color, by which point the flower is receptive to the pollen. The beetles have carried from a previous white-bloomed flower on another plant, the entire exchange conducted with a precision and an elegance that the darkness of the river at night conceals completely, leaving only the scent as evidence that something remarkable is taking place on the water's quiet surface as the mist begins its slow retreat before the morning sun, and the river's surface reveals itself inch by inch in the growing light. You can breathe slowly and peacefully here, feeling the warmth of the new day reaching you through the canopy above, and simply rest in the knowledge that around you, in every direction and at every scale from the microscopic to the vast, the forest is continuing its ancient and unhurried work, as it has always done, as it will always do. There is a tree in this forest that cannot exist alone, not in the way that most trees cannot exist alone, dependent on soil and water, and the general community of organisms that make any forest function, but in a more specific and more stringent sense, a sense that makes its continued presence in this landscape conditional on the survival of not one, but several other species, each one linked to the next in a chain of dependency so precise and so unforgiving that the removal of any single link would, over the course of a generation or two of trees, cause the whole chain to fail, and this particular giant to disappear from the forest as completely and as finally as though it had never been here at all. The tree is the Brazil nut tree, Berthelicia excelsa, and it is among the largest and longest-lived trees in the entire Amazon basin, its trunk rising straight and unbranched for 30, 40, sometimes 50 meters before spreading into a broad, rounded crown that sits above the general canopy like a great green island, floating in a sea of slightly lesser green, its bark thick and deeply furrowed with the accumulated texture of centuries, its wood so dense and so hard that a single large Brazil nut tree represents, in terms of the carbon it has drawn from the atmosphere and locked into its own substance over the course of its lifetime of 500 years or more, a quantity of stored carbon comparable to that released by burning several tons of coal. The Brazil nut tree flowers only once a year, producing small, pale yellow blooms that cluster in the upper branches of its enormous crown. And these flowers have a structure so particular, so specifically shaped, and so tightly closed at their base that only one group of bees in the entire Amazon basin possesses the physical size, the strength, and the curved tongue length necessary to force open that coiled petal and reach the nectar within. These are the large-bodied orchid bees, female bees that require specific orchid fragrances to attract their mates, meaning that the orchid bees cannot successfully reproduce without the orchids, and the Brazil nut tree cannot be pollinated without the orchid bees, which means that the Brazil nut tree's existence in this forest is dependent not only on the orchid bees, but on the orchids that the bees depend upon, three species bound together in a triangle of mutual necessity, so tight that it reads less like ecology and more like an equation. Remove any term, and the whole expression becomes unsolvable. If the bee pollinates the flower, and the flower is fertilized, the tree produces its fruit over the following 14 months, a process of extraordinary slowness and patience that results in a large woody capsule the size and weight of a cannonball, its outer shell so thick and so hard that it can fall from 50 meters and land on the forest floor without cracking. The seeds inside, the Brazil nuts themselves, arranged like the segments of an orange within their armored container, entirely inaccessible to almost every creature in the forest except one, the agouti, a medium-sized rodent with continuously growing teeth strong enough to gnaw through the Brazil nut pod's thick woody shell, is the only animal in the Amazon basin capable of opening the fruit consistently and reliably, and it does so not to consume all the seeds immediately, but to eat some and bury others across the forest floor in the caching, behavior common to many rodents, storing food against future scarcity in hidden locations that it will not always remember. And it is in those forgotten caches, those small buried deposits of seeds left by an animal that moved on and never returned to claim them, that the next generation of Brazil nut trees begins its slow 500-year story, germinating in the dark soil from a seed that an agouti buried and forgot in a forest that will have changed enormously by the time that seedling becomes a tree capable of flowering for the first time. As you lie here in the growing warmth of this new morning, breathing slowly and peacefully, you can feel the extraordinary weight of that chain of connection resting over you as gently and as completely as the forest's own canopy rests over everything beneath it, the orchid and the bee and the tree and the agouti, all part of the same slow and ancient story, each one holding its place in a pattern that has no beginning and no end, simply a continuous, unhurried, deeply peaceful unfolding that has been taking place in this forest since long before this morning, and will continue long after this night has dissolved entirely into the soft and generous light of a new day. And so we have arrived, you and I, at the last quiet passage of this long and gentle journey through one of the most extraordinary places on earth. And if you have traveled with this calming narration all the way from that first soft moment of settling in, from that first slow breath taken at the threshold of the pre-dawn forest, when the soil was cool beneath your feet, and the canopy was a vast, dark presence overhead, and the whole breathing world of the rainforest was just beginning to reveal itself to you in the unhurried way that only the most ancient and the most generous of places ever truly does. Then you have carried within you through all of these hours something that most people never have the opportunity to hold, a sense, however fleeting and however dreamlike, of what it feels like to be held inside a system so vast and so intricately connected, and so quietly, continuously alive, that the very idea of separateness, of being one thing apart from all other things, begins to soften and dissolve the longer you remain within it, the way the morning mist dissolves above the dark river when the sun has finally climbed high enough to reach it. The rainforest has been, across all the long hours of this sleep story, not merely a setting or a backdrop, but a presence, something that breathes and cycles and communicates and adapts and grieves and grows and dies, and begins again with a patience and a completeness that makes every human anxiety about time and urgency and the pressure of things undone feel from within this green and ancient world not important in the way it seemed before, but small and manageable and subject to the same slow dissolving that everything eventually undergoes in a place that has been practicing dissolution and renewal for 50 million years without interruption. You have walked the forest floor where the fungal threads carry their silent messages between the roots of trees that have been standing in this place for centuries. You have watched the rain arrive through the canopy in its long, slow relay of drop to leaf to drop to leaf, until it reached the soil beside you as something barely distinguishable from the forest's own breathing. You have rested beside the ancient Brazil nut tree and felt, without needing to understand it fully, the weight and the texture of a chain of connection so long and so specific that it stretches from the orchid's fragrance to the bee's curved tongue, to the tree's pale flower, to the agouti's buried cache, to the seedling that will become 5 centuries from now another enormous presence in a forest that will by then have changed in ways that no one living today can imagine, and yet will still, in all the ways that matter, be continuous with the forest you have been resting in tonight. The science that has moved through this bedtime story, like water moving through roots, is real. Every fact drawn from the patient and careful work of researchers who have spent years or decades in forests like this one, measuring and observing and recording, trying to understand in the precise language of science what the forest has been doing in its own language for incomparably longer, and what that science reveals again and again, and from every angle at which it approaches its subject, is not complexity for its own sake, but connection, the same deep and unhurried connection that you have been feeling in the slow rhythm of your own breathing throughout this night. The connection between one living thing and every other living thing it has ever depended upon or been depended upon by, a web so fine and so complete that pulling at any single thread changes the whole, and holding any single thread gently and with care supports the whole in ways that ripple outward further than any single mind can follow. So let the forest hold you now, as it has been holding everything within it for as long as it has existed, without effort and without demand, simply by being what it is, vast and warm and breathing and alive, its canopy above you like the softest ceiling ever made, its soil beneath you like the most patient and the most generous of foundations, the sound of its nighttime insects and its distant water and its occasional soft animal calls moving through the air around you like a lullaby that was old before the first human voice ever formed a word. And let your own breathing grow slower still and deeper and more completely your own, until there is nothing left to notice and nothing left to follow and nothing left to do except rest and sleep and be held as the forest holds everything it loves, quietly and completely and without end.